In the early 2000s, the video game industry was booming. The PlayStation 2 had infiltrated nearly every home, while Nintendo made an effort to recover some of its lost collaborators, and computing giant Microsoft was about to toss its hat into the video game ring. With the industry in this state, video game developers would have to embrace a more succinct, a more user-friendly design philosophy in order to keep the newly expanding market on board. Games were going to have to tell more attention-grabbing stories, have more eye-popping set pieces, and keep the pace up the whole time to never allow the player to get bored. Cinematic shooters had arrived and immediately overthrew the old guard. Medal of Honor was at its most popular. Rockstar's Max Payne and Grand Theft Auto 3 were raking in the sales. The Call of Duty seed had sprouted, and a little game released for the Xbox called Halo Combat Evolved. No more wandering labyrinths and reading text boxes. Games are linear and fully voiced now, and for some of those old guard shooter developers, this new world was very promising, but getting it right was going to be tough. Shadow Ops Red Mercury was developed by Zombie Studios and released in 2004. And well, nobody really noticed. It sold so poorly that Zombie Studios had to go on hiatus for a few years to try and recuperate some capital. The reviews at the time were mixed, and with such capable competition, there was no real reason to buy Shadow Ops. But if consumers had only known the truth, Shadow Ops goes places no other game dared to go, with transitions no other game dared to attempt, and gameplay no other game wanted to emulate. The footage recorded for this video was played on stream. If you want to come by, chat and hang out, join the Discord, get notifications there, and come and see what's going on. Shadow Ops Red Mercury follows the globe-trotting adventures of Captain Frank Hayden, a superstar soldier within the US Armed Forces who is apparently so good at soldiering that the CIA swoop in to enlist Hayden's services. The game begins toward the end of the narrative, as Hayden walks along the deck of an aircraft carrier and receives details about the location of the mission's target. Vladdy is carrying a suitcase that contains a nuclear explosive device called the Red Mercury, and Hayden's objective is to eliminate Vladdy and deactivate the bomb. Hayden and two other soldiers board a helicopter that takes them into the Syrian city, where Vladdy is currently hiding. After battling through the Syrian forces, who may be the National Army or a private military, I don't really know, Hayden comes across Vladdy escaping in a helicopter and fails to stop the bomb. He then has a tantrum over his communications device while Vladdy flies away and attempts to disarm the bomb himself. He fails and the bomb detonates, the shockwave causing massive destruction and engaging Hayden's flashback. 72 hours previously, Hayden was in the Congo trying to eliminate insurgent weapon caches and prevent further violence in the region. Upon completing this task, a helicopter arrives, and Kate Daniels disembarks with Russian double agent Yuri Antipov in tow. The CIA have learned of the Red Mercury device and want to send Hayden into a Kazakh military complex to try and seize the device before it is weaponized. Not only does Hayden fail this task, but he somehow manages to fail to shoot Vladdy while he is in the open, unprotected. At this stage, Hayden picks up an ex-girlfriend called Galina, and the two escape the facility. The searchers moved to Chechnya, where Vladdy was getting the bomb armed, then to Syria for a reason I don't really understand. After the explosion from the intro, it is revealed that Yuri and Galina had taken the second bomb and got onto a train to Paris in order to blow up the G8 summit. On the train, Hayden confronts the pair and learns that Galina had been kidnapped, and Kate was the other traitor. Kate escapes capture on the train and makes her way up the Eiffel Tower to detonate the bomb. Hayden tracks her the whole way and manages to reduce the potency of the bomb, but not totally defuse it. The day is saved, and Hayden gets to kiss Galina beneath the Eiffel Tower to end the game. Oh yeah.
That's just in case you ever try to leave me again.
Fat chance.
There are a lot of conveniences in this narrative that don't serve any kind of purpose, and the writing is just terrible. It is easily the best component of the game. The opening establishes that Frank Hayden doesn't trust anybody, and then he welcomes the player to his nightmare.
My mantra, word to the wise, trust no one. This is Frank Hayden. Welcome to my nightmare.
Kate Daniels tells Hayden his resume a couple of hours into the game, so the player knows how cool he is. Hayden knew both Galena and Vladdy prior to knowing that they were involved in the mission. He had close relationships with both, and they just happened to be central players in this totally unrelated adventure. The villain's motivations are questionable at best and laughable at worst. Why would nuking the G8 summit bring the Soviet Union back?
So what do you get out of this? Put the Soviet Union back on the map. And why not?
Why would killing some world leaders wipe all the bureaucratic scum off the top of the world's melting pot? Destroying Paris is somehow going to achieve these things? And why is that a woman's job?
Things up. Problem is, you should never send a man to do a woman's job.
This scene is fantastic, especially the transition from war-torn Syrian city to helicopter chasing the train to Hayden being inside of the train. It's so silly. I think it's worth slogging through the gameplay portions to get to these movies, but I can totally understand not wanting to do that. Shadow Ops is a substandard modern military first-person shooter. The levels are basically a series of on-rail shooter galleries that the player has to manually walk through. There are very few deviations from this, which seems to be a consequence of a number of things. Hayden controls just fine, although there is no run button, so the entire game is taken at a brisk walk. Mouse controls are as expected, and the grenade toss can eventually be intuited as a toss. There isn't a cover mechanic like Dark Sector. Even crouching behind cover doesn't work, because Hayden doesn't go low enough to hide his head. So being able to avoid damage is fairly difficult, but it is exacerbated by every non-explosive weapon being a hit scan weapon. And all of the enemies already know Hayden is coming, so they stand ready around every corner. I eventually started pre-firing when rounding corners to force any enemy there to flinch before they could hit scan me. A hit scan, for those unaware, is a ranged weapon that doesn't fire a simulated projectile when triggered. Instead, it draws a line from the weapon to the target and instantly deals damage if the target is valid. There is no time for reactions. You're hit or you aren't. And Shadow Ops runs almost entirely off of hit scan weapons. It wouldn't be a problem if healing weren't a precious resource. The only way to recover missing health is to find med packs throughout a level, although enemies do rarely drop them as well. The med packs heal 25 health and do not respawn, so there is a finite quantity of health that the player can lose before they are sent back to the start of the level. The med packs are placed periodically throughout the levels, but sometimes it's possible to find a large stash of them, so if the player loses too much health going forward, they can turn back and walk all the way to a health stash, provided they remember where it was. Enemies deal immediate, unavoidable damage, and the healing is scattered around in limited stationary quantities. There is also a woefully tiny number of enemy types. There are 3 vehicle enemy types, and there is 1 soldier enemy, although they can have a few different weapons and are reskinned depending on the part of the world that the level is set within. The vehicles are a tank that shot so infrequently I wasn't sure it was supposed to be dangerous at all, another armored vehicle called a BTR, which I also cannot remember being attacked by, and a helicopter that serves as the game's final boss. For the remaining 6 hours, the player will be shooting at the same human enemies again and again, whose scripting is no better than the vehicles. They'll frequently stand in the open or aggressively run toward the player, occasionally stopping behind cover, where they'll stay indefinitely so the player gets an opportunity to click on their heads. And they're all vulnerable to headshots from any weapon. Higher difficulties make enemies more resilient to body shots, but they're still susceptible to headshots. Even the soldiers in the final level, who actually wear head protection of some kind, are taken down by a single shot to the head. There are all these unique models amongst the enemies, and yet they're all pretty much the same thing. The visuals during gameplay fall into the same pitfalls that the gameplay mechanics do, but the animations in the movies are something else. I can only really say so much about samey looking rubble streets and barren building interiors. There's a good variety of palettes between the mostly brown and the mostly grey, but at the end of the day, all of the environments are basically the same. The movies though, whoever directed these needs an award, and whoever gave Hayden his huge bulging eyes needs an award too. The camera effects and scene transitions are so absurdly cheesy that I could not wait to get through the levels to see where these movies would go next. I had to see whatever new preset the animator found within their animation tool to make these transitions as perfect as they are. The zooms and shaky cam stuff only makes it better. I also only noticed at the very end of the game that the skyboxes are unbelievably garbage. This low resolution image of Paris looks like it curves upward, like the city is somehow on the inside of the Earth's crust. Oh, and the Congo levels kept forcing the player to look at this waterfall over and over. Like whoever made the level design thought it looked amazing and wanted to make sure everyone saw it. I described the level design as a series of on-rail shooter levels that the player has to walk through manually earlier, and it's pretty easy to make a case for why that is. The number of mini set-piece events where an enemy would throw open a window or somersault across the walkway was so high that I was instinctively pressing my foot into the ground to hide behind cover. The enemies throw over some shelves like they're going to offer some sort of protection, while they then just stand upright behind the mess that they've made. This chaos did sometimes make the path forward difficult to discern. Not only are the buildings destroyed and hallways blocked up, but some obstacles seem to exist for no reason, like the path through the level hadn't been fully completed, and things were just left in because it was easier than removing them. There's fun to be had with Shadow Ops, but nothing really worth the price of entry. What you get for the money is a silly action movie plot, and some entertaining visual flair, but also a tedious clicking exercise to space those fun sections out. It's pretty cheap on GOG, and you could make worse purchases, but you could effortlessly make better ones too. If the phrase "cooled 24/7 using a laser" sparks some interest in you, then I'd say it's worthwhile.
Red Mercury starts out as a hyperdense matter and has to be cooled 24/7 using a laser.
As an attempt to latch onto that timely trend of cinematic shooters, Shadow Ops Red Mercury isn't a total failure, but it definitely is not a high quality product. The story is full of highs, with the stakes that are twice as nuclear as any other game. Someone involved in the making of the game was trying to deliver on that promise of cinematic style, and despite failing at making Hayden's experience into a thrilling spy adventure, they did manage to create something significantly more entertaining. Zombie Studios didn't release another game for 5 years after Shadow Ops, their creative energy totally spent on a misguided attempt for superstardom. If they had only known what they had actually made, and if they had only taken themselves a little less seriously. Something new next week. A friend of the show of sorts.